Welcome, everybody. My name is Stacy Matrazo, and I am the Executive Director of the Florida Wildflower Foundation. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, From Beaches to Bays, Native Plants for Florida's Coastal Communities. For those of you not familiar with our organization, our mission is to protect, connect, and expand native wildflower habitats through our education, research, planting, and conservation programs. We do this primarily from the sale and renewal of the state wildflower license plate. This is our old look. This is our newer look. The funds we receive from either of these plates, along with donations and memberships, allow us to support and create projects that build awareness and knowledge of native wildflowers and plants throughout Florida. We'd like to encourage those of you who find our programs valuable to consider becoming a member, making a donation, or purchasing that state wildflower license plate. And if you do purchase or have the tag, you are eligible for a membership with the foundation. Just let us know that you have it and we'll get you set up in our database. Be sure to check our website for resources on planting and growing wildflowers, to learn where to see wildflowers in bloom, to learn about upcoming events, and more. We're also on social media. You can find us on most platforms at FLA Wildflowers. Our next webinar will be presented by Sarah Burke, Vice Chair of the Florida Wildflower Foundation. She'll be presenting How to Start a Backyard Revolution on October 11th. We also have some great field trips coming up too. On October 7th, we will have an exclusive tour of DeLuca Preserve. This is an area in Yeehaw Junction, Central Florida, that is not open to the public, so it's a very special opportunity for us. In November, we'll take a hike through Jonathan Dickinson State Park to see fall wildflowers. Be sure to follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter to stay abreast of our webinar and field trip opportunities and other events that we are participating in. I have just a couple of housekeeping items to go over before we get started. All attendees are muted with cameras off. The chat is open, but if you want to pose a question to our presenter, please use the Q&A feature to submit them. We are not monitoring the chat for questions, so please use that Q&A. We'll address questions at the end of the talk as time permits. If you don't get your question answered, you can email it to us at info@flawildflowers.org, and we will be sure to pass that on to our presenter as well. The webinar is being recorded. It will be available on our website and our YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. When it is available, you will receive an email from us with a link to the recording, along with a resource page with links from today's webinar. Now I would like to introduce our presenter. Nichole Perna grew up on a small barrier island in Brigantine, New Jersey, where she became active in local environmental efforts. She attended Stockton University and researched Diamondback terrapins and rehabbed seals, dolphins, and sea turtles. After graduation, she moved to Florida and began working with Brevard County's Environmentally Endangered Lands Program, where she's now a land management specialist. She spent over a decade restoring coastal habitats and monitoring threatened and endangered species. During this time, she also earned a master's degree in ecological restoration from the University of Florida. She assists in managing the Barrier Island Center in the heart of the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge. And after the massive fish kills of 2016, Nichole and her husband Erik were prompted to do more to help the Indian River Lagoon. They started Go Native Landscaping to help friends, neighbors, and their local community create beautiful, biodiverse landscapes. Without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Nichole.
All right, thank you. Hold on a second. Okay. Not sure why it's not showing me. Okay.
We can see your screen.
Okay, I can, it's odd though, because is it full screen or it's not full screen yet? Probably not. I'm just gonna go to full screen. Okay. Last time it just popped up all on its own. Okay. Okay, there we go. All right, thank you, everybody. Yeah, my name is Nichole, and so I've been working in Florida doing restoration ecology and restoring ecosystems for over 15 years. And I started doing work on my own home about maybe 10 years ago. And so that's kind of how I started. I started seeing the species that I was working with out in the field and realizing, you know, the potential for use in landscaping in my home. And so I kind of tried to create my own little mini maritime hammock at my house, and inspired other people on my street to kind of adopt similar species too and come to me for help and advice. And then after our region, our area was experiencing, you know, really big decline in water quality, we felt like one of the things that we could do to help the community was offer our services in doing designs and installations. So we've been doing that for the past few years as well. And so, yeah, I have been working mainly in the coastal environment, but a lot of these species, you know, are fairly adaptable. If they can handle growing on the beach or near the beach, then a lot of times they can handle growing in communities across Florida. So, and a little bit about the habitats across the barrier islands, so out near the beach. This is going to kind of be the most harsh coastal environment that we have. Really strong, intense salt spray, really, you know, sometimes wet soils, sometimes really dry soils, depending on the conditions. As you get further up the dune, it can be very hot and dry up there. And so these species have to be really highly adapted to that environment. So we have a little bit less diversity here. But then as you move across the barrier island, things become more biodiverse, more species are able to thrive, and the conditions aren't quite as harsh. As you move across as well, the soils are going to change. So, you know, from the beach, of course, it's going to be very sandy, well drained, and in the coastal strand habitats as well. But as you move further from the ocean, the trees species tend to get larger, they draw out more litter, the soils become more organic. And then as you get closer to the water table and the estuary, obviously the soils get very organic and are a lot moister. And so the species across here are going to change. And I'm going to try to, you know, highlight the best species for the different type of habitat you might have in your backyard. And it may be, you know, now vastly different from what it was originally, but there are ways to kind of figure that out and piece in the species that are going to work well for you. So our coastal environments, you know, can be severely impacted by storms. So this is just some pictures just from last year after Hurricane Nichole came through. And so we've had a lot of soil loss and erosion, and a lot of plant loss. And so, you know, we really need to try to build more resilient ecosystems that are along our shorelines so they can handle sea level rise and they can handle these more severe and frequent storms. And so that's what I try to do, and you know, in both my jobs out on the beach, you know, doing coastal plantings, and then helping homeowners too that are, you know, losing their property and seeing a lot of impacts. So there are species that will handle these environments better than others. But knowing what climate zone you're in is extremely important. And so Florida is very long. And so we have several zones across the state. So each zone is separated by about 10 degrees as the average minimal temperature for that zone. So it's 10 degrees different between 8, 9, and then 9, 10, and then 11 down here in the Keys. So for us, it's very important to know where you lie, you know, across the state, what your zone is, because there's going to be species that are going to do really well in the southern part of the state where we're not seeing very, you know, many nights of cold temperatures, you know, in the 30s or the 20s, because those species are going to freeze and die back. And then up here, we're going to have more temperate species thriving and surviving, and you're not going to see as much subtropical species, you know, doing well here. But it kind of in this middle zone, especially along the coast, there's going to be, you know, because the water mitigates how cold it gets, you're going to see more subtropical species kind of in these areas. And I'm going to cover both temperate and subtropical species. And because this zone, there's an overlap, we do tend to see a higher diversity of plant species here, which is good. For us, it's going to give us more species to choose from. So this is a brochure from the Sarasota Bay National Estuaries Program, and we're going to provide a link for this, but this is just a great kind of simplified layout and example of different species that you can utilize if you live near the coast, if you live on a seawall. And so it's important to note a few, different things on here. So it's highlighting basically how much these species, how much sun they like. You're going to want to need to know that. How much salt spray they're going to be able to take, how much moisture they need. And so that's usually determined by your soil. So if you have really dry, sandy soils, even when it rains, it's not going to hold the moisture very long. So your plants are going to need to be adapted to those type of conditions. And then you're going to need to think about size, especially. So when you go to your native plant nursery and pick out, something that might look pretty and beautiful, and it may be, a much smaller version of what it's going to become. So knowing how big your plants are going to get is going to save you a lot of time and energy into the future. You just want to, you don't want to have to go back and be trimming things and just creating more work for yourself. So doing a little bit of research into what you're getting before you purchase it is really important. And then a lot of these species here as well are going to be beneficial for birds or for butterflies. Some are going to be better at, holding the soil and filtering water or runoff from your property. So I'm going to get into more details of a lot of these plants as we go along. Okay, so our first area I figured I'd start out with would be, out closer to the beach with our grasses. So our sea oats are going to be the dominant species out there, our pioneer species. They're actually protected for good reason. They have really deep, extensive rhizomes and roots that help to hold the soil and the sand together. They're going to grow and spread pretty significantly though, so unless you're have property out on the beach, then they're not a huge one to recommend, but they are an important food source for beach mice and for birds and other species that are out on the dune. And there's really no better plant to plant out there. You might also find beach panicum mixed in with our sea oats. And so this is also kind of like a mat forming grass. It's going to grow together with its extensive root system, and it's going to be also a little bit taller, so you can kind of plant this in a mass in an area. It's going to want full sun. They're used to being in really exposed areas, so you need to make sure that it gets plenty of sunlight, and it's going to have some room to grow. But it is a really attractive kind of bluish grayish color to it, and it does provide habitat and cover for species. Just below that, we have seashore paspalum on the left-hand side. And this is actually a native grass that you can get in sod form, especially if you're on the West Coast, it's a little bit easier to get. And it can be watered actually with salt water. So sometimes they use this on golf courses, but it has an extensive root system. It's naturally found along the shoreline of our estuaries, and it's a really great stabilizer. And then across from there, we have one of my favorites. This is salt meadow cordgrass or Spartina patens. So this is excellent for areas closer to the beach. So this will grow kind of like in a meadow just off of the beach. And then also in kind of an area a little bit further up, not quite along the shoreline of the lagoon. It wants to be a little bit drier than that. It doesn't want to be flooded all the time, but this will take periodic flooding. So this is an excellent choice for behind a seawall. And this, will take, if a storm came through here and this got inundated, it would be okay. It's going to stay low, only about 2 feet tall, and growing really densely. And it's beautiful green. It's a nice green kind of alternative to something like St. Augustine grass, which you have to mow and maintain and water and fertilize. This is going to be pretty much good to go once the plant is established. And then behind it is some pink mealy grass. I'm going to get to that on the next slide. So these are all clumping grasses. So they're going to be single grasses that are going to spread more from seed. And so this time of year, the muley grass should be starting to bloom if it hasn't started blooming yet, and it gets these beautiful purple puffs of color. This one is a little bit closer to the water, so it's growing a little bit fuller and taller. So depending on your site conditions, you know, if you have a drier soil, these are only going to get to be about 2 or 3 feet tall, but if you have a more moist soil, they're going to get taller than that and fuller. Similarly with dwarf Fakahatchee, they're going to be about you know, 2 to 3 feet, maybe 4 feet tall, depending on how much moisture is in your soil. And then the dwarf Fakahatchee is also a host plant as well. So when you see the little butterfly, it's a host plant species for butterflies. And all of these grasses, you know, they create excellent cover for different species, different small mammals to hide and to forage, and you know, to create even little, you know, dens and have a safe place for the young to hide, which is important. And so all of these grasses as well, I love utilizing them because they're fairly inexpensive to purchase and to put into your landscape. They're wonderful filler plants in between some of you know, your shrubs and your trees, and they're going to create some texture and some movement. So these are always wonderful to utilize, and they don't get, you know, they're not going to get too big. They can be trimmed after they seed out if you wish, but it's not necessary. You don't need to. If you want really low maintenance, then you know, that's not something that you necessarily have to do. A smaller clump grass that we have that I also love utilizing is this coastal lovegrass. There's also a purple lovegrass, so it's almost like a mini muley that can be utilized, and they just have these beautiful, almost like firework displays of flowers and seeds that the birds will come and feed on, and they're just much smaller. These are only going to be, you know, maybe 18 inches to 2 feet. And so they're great for walkways and for smaller areas where you don't want to have to worry about, you know, trimming something back. They're going to stay small. And then we have sand cordgrass, which is going to get much bigger. So this is utilized along beaches, along stormwater ponds, salt and freshwater marshes. And they can get, you know, much larger and bigger. Same thing. There's a full-size Fakahatchee grass that can be utilized as well. And they can both take a lot of moisture. And the sand cordgrass will go much drier though too. And so the full-size Fakahatchee and the sand cordgrass are going to be more like 5 foot plus. So just make sure when you're putting them in, you're going to have enough room to move and walk around them. But they can both be beautiful additions to your landscaping. Okay. So that is the grasses. We're going to move more into some of our annual wildflowers. And there's a lot to cover, so I'm not going to be able to get into too much detail about each one of these, or we'll be here till tonight. But these are some of my favorites. So we have blue curls. This is forked blue curls here. This is a great ground cover. It has these beautiful little purple flowers all over it, and it will tolerate really dry conditions. It will also tolerate some shade, which is nice because a lot of our wildflowers, you know, they want full sun, but this will tolerate some shade. And it's an annual, so it's probably going to, you know, start flowering for a good amount of time in the spring, throughout the summer and fall, and then it's going to typically die back in the winter. And so most of these you can just kind of come through in the wintertime and just do some deadheading and thin them out to kind of keep your garden looking, you know, a little bit more neat and organized. If you have a, you know, a backyard area where, you know, where you want to let everything kind of just go to seed and stay, that's fine, but it just kind of depends on your aesthetic and what you want it to look like. But yeah, don't feel bad about coming in and thinning things out. Because, you know, some species will actually just they'll come right back from seed, or they'll actually resprout if you come in and kind of thin them out a little bit. And all of these are prolific reseeders. So if you don't want them reseeding too much, as soon as they're done flowering, then you're going to want to trim those out. So blue curls, and then we have partridge pea. So this is going to have a shorter blooming time, but it is going to be really beautiful. It's going to be covered in these fairly large yellow flowers. It is a host plant for butterflies. But it's going to really die back kind of quickly in the fall, and it'll look almost like a little bit of like a tumbleweed in the environment. So you can just kind of, as soon as it does that, you can just pull it from the ground. It's barely going to even be attached. It might even blow around on your own property, but it will come back from seed because it seeds prolifically, as does the salvia. The salvia is going to have a longer bloom time, and it has these beautiful, it can have, there's a blue salvia or tropical red salvia, there's latherleaf salvia. They're all really pretty, but they will, flower like crazy. And then over time, they're going to kind of fade. And so you can kind of come in and thin those out. All of these are going to get to be somewhere between 2 to 4 feet tall. Black-eyed Susans including. So the bottom picture here are black-eyed Susans. I used to be worried that they weren't going to be too salt tolerant, but these do excellent. As long as they have a little bit of moisture, they tend to do really well in our soils of our coastal, drier soils where it's just a lot of sand. As long as they have a bit of moisture, then they're going to really spread and have a really long bloom time. Then they're going to die back and come back from seed as well. Okay, so we have some mints here. We have our horse mint or our bee balm. This is going to be a beautiful, attractive plant for tons of bees and pollinators. So plant this somewhere close by where you can watch it and observe it. So I have one planted kind of right out of my front door, right near my couch or my window, and I can just see all the activity coming here. So it's going to bloom a lot during the late summer and fall, and then it'll die back in the winter and come back from seed. We have Dune sunflower, which is going to stick around longer. It's going to grow a little bit lower to the ground, but it's really going to spread out. And so if you have a large area to cover, then Dune sunflower can really help fill in areas fairly quickly. You just want to make sure that you're utilizing the right species. So there's an East Coast species and a West Coast species. And these are going to bloom and be beautiful for a long time. If they do kind of, die back, you can just pull them out as well. And then within, a couple of weeks, you're going to see the nude seedlings, starting to grow and start to come back and fill back in again. Beach verbena is an endemic, and it's a rare species as well, and it's typically on the backside of our dunes in open, sandy, hot, coastal environments, and it's just beautiful. It's one of the prettiest ones that we have available to us. Just make sure you're getting it from a native nursery, so it's the native verbena, but this will also spread fairly large out from the base, and you can plant them in mass, and they're just really tough and gorgeous and very low growing. And then I just wanted to add the salt marsh fleabane for those that are living kind of more in an estuary or, along the water, because they might come up on their own. So if you see this in your garden, please leave it. They're beautiful. So this actually came up after Hurricane Nichole last year, and they're just, they're gorgeous. They have these pretty pink blooms on them, and then they're going to fade back over the winter. So these species that I'm showing now are not annuals, so these are going to stick around. These are some perennials to add to your landscape. So the top one is a Stokes aster, which is just gorgeous. It's this giant, large, purple, beautiful flower, and it has this strappy green leaves for the base of it. So even when it's not in bloom, it kind of has just an attractive brown cover appeal to it, and it will take some shade. So if it's in full sun and it's drier soils, it's going to struggle, but in the shade, it should, in partial shade, it should be pretty happy. And it's just one of my favorites. It's so beautiful. And then we also have heliotrope, which just blooms all the time. This is an excellent ground cover. It comes in white and yellow, and it stays very low to the ground. It's only, just about 2 or 3 inches off of the ground, and it fills in very densely, so it's excellent for keeping away weeds, and it's just constantly visited by bees and pollinators, so it's one of my favorites. It's not going to take direct salt spray, but as long as you're not right off of the ocean, this will work really well in your garden. So you're going to want to kind of plant this closest to the edge of your beds because it's going to be pretty small. In the back part of your garden, you could utilize goldenrod. So this is seaside goldenrod, but there are several varieties of goldenrod depending on where you are across the state. And they're going to get these beautiful blooms in the fall that are going to be fairly tall. And then it's going to have a green leafy mass to the base of it. So this will be around all year, the base, and it's going to spread from roots and kind of create a colony. So just make sure wherever you plant this, it's going to not just stay in that one spot, it's going to spread out and grow larger from there. So you might want to put this on, you know, in a isolated flower bed, because it can be, you know, pretty full and pretty aggressive, but it is a really extremely important plant for pollinators and for wildlife. If you have issues growing milkweed, you can plant and utilize this. Instead, it's a lot easier. It's not going to be a host plant, but it is going to be a really important nectar plant for a lot of species. And then we also have narrowleaf silkgrass over here to the right. So this has all these tiny fine hairs on it. It kind of gives it like a silvery, silky appearance. This is going to go really dry as well, and it'll spread out from its root system and kind of create colonies. And so this is great if you have really dry, sandy soils and not a lot of, you know, water or irrigation. Silkgrass is going to do well. Then we're going to move on to some of our vines. Our vines are so beautiful. Every time I see pictures of them, I just want to plant them everywhere. But they do grow fairly quickly, a lot of these species. So we just need to think about where are they going to grow in my garden before you plant them. So make sure you have a trellis or an arbor or you know, some sort of structure for them to grow onto. Especially the railroad vine. This can grow, I swear it grows 10 feet a day. So I utilize this a lot in coastal restoration projects, and you can use it, you know, along the shoreline, but it is going to grow so quickly, and you just want to make sure you can manage it, because these things will, you know, they're going to climb over whatever they come into contact with, and that can be kind of messy and a maintenance issue. The sky blue cluster vine is one of my favorites as well, but it can be aggressive. So this one is growing up an arbor in this photo, and it just has these small blue blooms all over it. It is very tolerant of salt and wind. So it's an excellent addition to your garden. You can use it as a ground cover, but as I said, it might kind of run out from where you've planted it and start to climb a bit more. And then we have our passion vines. We have quirky stem, and then the purple passion flower, which is pictured here. And they can, you know, also be somewhat aggressive, but they're so beautiful. So just put them on an arbor or a trellis and give them some place to grow, or even a fence, and they're going to be pretty happy. The quirky stem will grow in a fair amount of shade, and I think the purple one as well, but it's just not going to bloom as much without a good amount of sun. And then we have the coral honeysuckle. It has beautiful coral colored tubular shaped flowers that are very attractive for hummingbirds and all types of pollinators. And it's just a beautiful, tough vine. It's going to be able to take a lot of wind and salt spray, not direct ocean salt spray, but it is really important for a lot of other species as well, not just butterflies. So we're going to start moving a little bit more into things that are going to grow a little bit bigger into our shrubs and ground covers. So we have a mangrove spider lily here. So these like moisture soils, but they will go a little bit drier. They just kind of tend to, in the gardens I've planted them, if they're not getting enough moisture, they just tend to kind of fade back a little bit, and then they'll spring back once we get better rains or more moisture. This one is blooming, has beautiful, really fragrant white flowers on them. These also do well in shade too. So if you don't have moist soils, but you have some shade, these will be happy there as well. And these are going to get to be, you know, about 3 feet tall, maybe a little bit taller and fuller, depending on how much moisture they receive. But you can divide them and split them and kind of, you know, spread them throughout your landscaping. But they make a really nice accent too. They have these really, you know, succulent, strappy green leaves. Just below there, we have the narrow-leaf yellowtop, which gets covered in beautiful yellow flowers this time of year. So on the backside of the dunes or along our estuaries, this is going to be blooming like crazy and attracting a lot of pollinators. And then mixed in there, you may also notice some salt marshmallow, which is one of our native hibiscus. This is going to grow a little bit taller, maybe about 4 to 5 feet tall. But they're just gorgeous, beautiful flowers. They'll have, they can have dozens and dozens of flowers on them. And then we have just above that, we have our seaside gentian, which is also, it's one of the prettiest, I think, native wildflowers that we have here as well. This isn't annual though, so we're going to see it blooming, this time of year. And then over the next couple months, it's just going to kind of fade and we'll come back from seed. So we also have sea purslane. This is excellent for, along the coastline, on the beach or along the lagoon. It forms like a dense mat and has these pretty purple flowers. You can utilize it in your regular landscaping and yard as well as a low ground cover. We have sea oxeye daisy on the right here. These have beautiful yellow flowers all year round. These are going to want to kind of form colonies though from their root systems. So they're great for shoreline plantings, for buffers. They're just really tough and they take, pretty dry soils as well. They're just not going to grow as quickly. And then we have inkberry, which is a succulent. This grows right out on our dunes, but I love utilizing this as kind of like a, a medium, smaller shrub in our landscaping, just because it's very tough. It can withstand lots of wind and salt spray, and it gets these beautiful little half moon shaped white flowers on it. So it's just it's great texture for your landscaping, and it will kind of spread out further from here, but it'll only get to be about thigh high. And then we have golden creeper, which makes really dense mounds out on our beach and dune ecosystem. And so this is a great kind of alternative for lower areas that you maybe want to look like grass because they're nice and green all the time. And you can kind of shear them and shape them so they stay a little bit neater. They're going to produce these yellow fruits and these kind of light pink flowers. And they're just super tough for really hard places. We have sea lavender. This is going to occur a little bit further south in this state. So like zone 10A is going to be the furthest north you're going to want to plant this, but it's a beautiful shrub. You can see it pictured here out on the beach behind this beach elder. And it gets pretty white flowers that attract lots of butterflies and insects. We have, of course, the kunti plant, which is a host plant for Atala butterflies, but this is just extremely versatile and tough. It doesn't have any flowers, but it does have really attractive seeds that are kind of like a bright orange red color. They are poisonous, so don't eat them, but this is a great foundation plant for around your house, your home. It's slow growing, but it's extremely tough and drought tolerant. And these get to be about 5 feet tall over time. And then just below there, we have beach tea, which also grows on our back dunes. And these are beautiful. They get covered in small little white flowers, and these will kind of spread and make a really nice dense ground cover. And they get to be, between 2 and 3 feet tall, and they will typically last a few, at least maybe 1 to 2 seasons. And sometimes you'll come out and they'll just kind of die back. So don't freak out. They're just doing their thing. They're going to come back from seed and hopefully, recover and do that again. They're just not very long lived. And then beach elder is just an excellent succulent green ground cover that goes very, very dry. And it makes just a really nice, attractive, element to your landscaping. Okay, we have more trees and shrubs to start to get into. So I might need to move a little bit faster as I go through these. But this is a necklace pod. These get to be, about 10 to 15 feet tall, beautiful yellow blooms, very, very tough coastal plants. Below that, we have the cassia, and there's a few species of cassia. This is Bahama cassia, which tends to stay a little bit lower. It'll flower for a longer period of time. And it is a host plant for butterflies. So this is, you know, a beautiful, attractive one to utilize in your garden. It's going to be about a medium size shrub. And then we have button sage lantana. It gets these beautiful white clusters of flowers. They almost look like little buttons, and they will attract tons and tons of pollinators. It's an excellent little shrub bush to utilize. You can use it under, you know, taller canopy trees. And so if it gets a little bit of shade, they actually tend to look a little bit more attractive. If they're in the full sun and full wind, sometimes they can look a little bit beat up. And then we also have false indigo. These are like a little bit of moisture, so they're great for like a rain garden, and they have these beautiful purple spikes. They're just gorgeous and are also a host plant. So some of these might look a little bit more familiar. The beautyberry and the wild coffee are common understory plants in our hammocks. And they will take, you know, part shade, part sun, to kind of look their best. I've seen coffees and beautyberries growing in full sun, but sometimes they just look a little bit more stressed. But they're going to be important food sources for birds, and the beautyberries are going to be, you know, have these attractive berries all year round, until, you know, usually late winter, and then they'll start to drop off. But it's a great food source for birds when there's not much else around to eat. And then of course coffees will do better in more shade, and it gives you some color and some beautiful white flowers and a nice shiny leaf appearance for more shady sites. And then we have a marlberry. So this is a small tree. This is it gets these beautiful white clusters of flowers, and then this will just be full and loaded with fruits for the migratory birds that come through and are going to be looking to snack on that. And then at the bottom right-hand side, we have cinnamon bark. This is a smaller tree. It's going to be more for, you know, zone 10A and further south. But it gets these beautiful tiny clusters of flowers. So they'll be kind of purplish before they open, and they'll be bright red in the center. And they're just really tough and beautiful. They have a great natural shape to them. You don't really have to worry about trimming and pruning them. And they only get to be, you know, around 15 to 20 feet tall. So they're a great addition. So we also have cocoa plums. So there are red tip and horizontal varieties. These produce fruits for people and for wildlife. The red tip will get taller, about 15 feet tall. You can use it as a hedge, as a screening plant. They're excellent. So are Jamaican capers. Capers can be beautiful hedge plants. They get these in the springtime. They will get these beautiful white flowers that will fade to pink. They almost look like fireworks. And they're just really tough and beautiful and very dense. So they're excellent for screening. These will get to be about 15 feet tall as well. And they will tolerate more shade. They're just not going to be as full. Then we have tea bush, which is one of my favorites, the gray tea bush. So this is found a little bit further south in Florida as well. So it's not going to tolerate too cold of temperatures. The cocoa plums and the firebush either. They're going to kind of die back some in a freeze. But they just produce tons of beautiful small pink flowers, and the bees just can't get enough. So plant one of these as well, somewhere where you can sit and watch and enjoy them, because they're going to be a magnet for pollinators. And then the firebush is so versatile and just so beautiful. So, you know, it can go in shade or sun. It's going to get, you know, a decent size. So just make sure that it has enough room. It can get to be about 15 feet tall. Okay, then we have blolly trees. These are going to stay a little bit more compact. They have hot pink fruits that are very attractive and succulent. We have coral beans that have these gorgeous coral-shaped tubular flowers that the hummingbirds and butterflies will be attracted to in the very late winter, early springs. This is one of the first blooms you might notice. And then we have bay cedars as well. So these are, this is also going to be about, you know, 10 to 15 feet tall. These grow right out in the open sandy beach ecosystem, but these make a great hedge or screen too. And they're also a host plant, and they get covered in these small little yellow flowers kind of all over them. then we have several species of stopper. So this one pictured here is the Simpson stopper, which could be utilized as a hedge or a small, slow-growing tree. As they get older, their bark can kind of peel and almost look like a crepe myrtle, and they're just beautiful and really attractive. They get covered in these little white puffs, and they have these bright orange and red fruits. So these are excellent and really adaptable. They will tolerate really dry conditions. All of the species on this page, hot, sandy, dry, is what they like and thrive in. And so we're going to move into some coastal trees now. There are more shrubs than I could include on this, unfortunately, but I just can't include everything, so I'm going to run out of time. But I'm going to move on to trees now. So we have red cedars are beautiful, large. They provide a lot of food for wildlife. You can see these, the cones actually on here that are blue. This is a female tree. We have our live oak trees. We have several species of oak, obviously, and they're just magnets and super important keystone species for wildlife. They're going to be slow growing, but they're going to be really important canopy species. We have magnolias, several species, sweet bays, which are going to like a little bit more moisture. We have southern magnolias, which get very large, but there are smaller varieties like a little gem that you can utilize, and they're very, very salt tolerant. And then, of course, we have pine trees. You know, our coasts are really dominated, and our whole state really is by pine flatwoods, pine trees, and palmettos. And so in our area, we don't have many pines that are left, but they're definitely a natural part of our ecosystem. They thrive, and our soils that we have here and can withstand all the hurricane conditions, and they provide excellent nesting sites for eagles and birds and lots of wildlife. So they're one of those keystone species to include as well. Hollies are also really important, and maples, but I just didn't have enough time to include those here as well. So those are our more temperate coastal trees that I just covered, and we're going to talk a little bit about our subtropical trees. So we have gumbo limbos. So this kind of takes over as our canopy tree species here in Brevard County, starting to move south. And these are just beautiful, really unique, cool trees. They have a peely bark, and they call them the tourist tree. So when a tourist comes to Florida, they get a sunburn, and then their skin peels. So this is also known as a tourist tree. But this is wonderful to plant if you're in the right zone, like zone 10A, and you're looking for more shade to grow quickly. So I've planted several of these in my yard, and within a few years, you're going to get some shade to be able to sit under and utilize. And buttonwoods are also another species that can kind of give you a canopy. These are going to grow quickly. They're very adaptable to really drier conditions and also wetter conditions. So they can grow right out on the beach, or they can grow right along the shoreline of an estuary, and anywhere in between. So you can have them as a hedge, a tall hedge, because they're going to be somewhere between 15 to 20 feet tall, unless you're trimming it shorter. Or you can have it as a single specimen like this. This is a silver buttonwood. These are going to grow a bit smaller and stay a bit smaller, but they're really just beautiful, great, tough, resilient coastal trees. And then, of course, sea grapes. Most of you may be familiar with our sea grape trees. They really kind of dominate our dune ecosystem, but they are going to be, cold. They're going to die back if we have a frost. That's why you don't see them further up in the northern part of the state, but they produce lots and lots of flowers, and then lots and lots of fruit. So they can be a bit messy. So just know that when you're planting them, and just know that, most of the species on this page, they're going to grow from anywhere from 25 to 50 feet tall. So the sea grape is going to continue to grow and get larger. So just make sure it has enough room to do so. And then we have the paradise tree too. So we just start to see that just right around Indian River County and further south. And these will also grow very quickly. They produce lots of small and conspicuous flowers, but they're very attractive for pollinators. And then they have these bright red fruits that the birds love to come and feast on. And these also grow fairly quickly. Our subtropical trees, because of the warm climate and rainfall, tend to grow, quicker. And then, of course, we have lots of native palms to choose from, especially in the southern part of the state. The diversity of palms kind of increases. So we have our royal palms are native. They can get to be 100 feet tall. They're going to require more moisture and more organics in order for them to survive. But they are really, really gorgeous. So then we also have several species of thatch palm. We have a keys thatch palm, which gets to be about 15 feet tall. It has a silver coloration underneath of its frond, and it's just like a very unique, beautiful coastal palm to utilize. It's very, very tough. All the species on this page, though, are going to be, not be able to withstand cold freezing temperatures, so they're going to be at least need to be around zone 10A. The Florida thatch is almost like a miniature cabbage palm, but slightly more attractive. And it's really not quite as messy. It doesn't produce quite as many seed pods and flowers and fruit, but they are attractive for wildlife. So the bees and the pollinators will come visit it, and the wildlife will come and utilize the fruit, but it's not, it doesn't drop as much debris underneath of them, and it stays much smaller, so you can plant this closer to your house or to buildings or structures because they stay so much smaller. They're going to grow just as tall, but their fronds and their base of their trunk are smaller, so they're just going to stay more compact than a cabbage palm. And then we have our buccaneer palm too, or a cherry palm. So these are also slow growing, but really attractive and beautiful and unique. And these berries will turn kind of a bright red color once they're ripe. We also have silver saw palmettos, and those are really beneficial for wildlife. They get very large though, so just keep that in mind when you're planting them, and they're slow growing, but over time they will get very large. We have a dwarf palmetto as well, which is kind of similar to a cabbage palm, but it doesn't quite get, a trunk to it, so it's not going to get to be so tall. So these will tolerate, shady conditions as well, though. These are great, really cold tolerant palms, these two. We have a silver palm as well, which is, very, very rare, but is extremely beautiful. It has this bright silvery color underneath and then a dark, really green color on top. These are also slow growing, but very, very salt and wind tolerant, so they can grow right onto the beach. And then we have an Adam's needle as well. It's not a palm, but it's a little bit unique, so I kind of stuck it in here with the other palms. It is a yucca, and they get these beautiful stalks, these flowering stalks and blooms that the bees just are super attracted to. And so these will, stay on for several weeks, and then they'll kind of start to fade and fall off, and then you can just kind of come in and trim those stalks away. And then the base of them will also kind of die back in sections and just kind of spread and kind of keep a mound and kind of continue to spread from the center. So I have a couple just kind of alternatives to grass that you can utilize as a ground cover, or you can even plant these within your grass if your grass is not looking well or is dying. So frog fruit is excellent. It'll grow in shade or sun. It tolerates a variety of soils. It likes it, a tad bit of moisture will keep it looking healthy, but it will tolerate mowing as well, and it's just an excellent alternative ground cover. Host plant for butterflies, of course. We have sunshine mimosa as well. So sunshine mimosa is definitely going to need a lot of sunlight though, so just make sure where you're going to be planting this, it's going to get full sun, but this will spread and grow and fill in. So my yard had some dying grass in it that I wasn't trying to maintain and bring back to life. So I planted some mimosa in my backyard, and it just really filled in and took over. It's got a very deep root system to be able to access water during times of drought, and it fixes its own nitrogen, and has these beautiful pink puffs. And then twin flower is another excellent ground cover to utilize. So there's a drier version and a more swampy hammock version that you can get. So just make sure you're getting the correct species of twin flower when you go to your native plant nursery. But this will take also being walked on and being mowed. It's very versatile and tough. And it just grows in very densely. So it's really great for keeping out weeds and other competing species. So you want to plant this kind of in a mass and together and grouped. And I know I'm running a little bit short on time, so feel free to pull the plug on me as you need to. But I just want to, mention the reason why we're doing all of this, and it's important for us to gain knowledge about all the native species that I've talked about and that are available at our nurseries, is just because our state is rapidly changing, and what is occurring is, a lot of habitat loss, and we're losing a lot of our native species, and what is being replaced with those native species is a whole lot of lawn. And so it's, about 90% of our suburban areas are lawn, and the species of shrubs and trees that they're installing are not native. And so we're spending a lot of money to manage about 40 million acres of lawn, and it's not even a crop that we can, kind of utilize or eat or do anything with, but just maintain. And so, I would like for everyone to try to move towards more biodiverse landscapes, ones that have, a lot more species of plants that will support a lot more species of animals and wildlife, and that are more self-sustaining over time. So the bottom picture is kind of like a typical landscape for a lot of people, where it's really dominated by sod. You might have a few species of shrubs or trees for a hedge, but that's it. And so this is going to need to be constantly watered and mowed and sprayed in order to maintain this look. And so it's providing really little benefit to wildlife, and it's causing a lot more of environmental problems because of all the resources that are required to maintain it. And so we know that things that we're spraying on our landscapes are not staying there. They're moving into our groundwater, and they're causing issues with water quality and problems for not just bees and birds, but for humans as well. And so there are some sustainable landscape practices that I really encourage you to take on to be able to reduce your impact. And they're going to help you reduce the resources you need to put into your landscapes. They're going to help you save time and water and money. They're going to help you reduce runoff and reduce your emissions and hopefully erosion if that is an issue for you. They're also going to help to increase biodiversity within your yard and support a larger ecosystem and network of plants and animals. So just by shrinking your lawn areas and utilizing the right natives that are going to work well within your landscape, because you don't want to have to put them in and water them all the time. You're going to want to water till they're established, but after that, it might just be during periods of drought that you're going to need to water them at all. And then you're going to want to, by doing so, you're going to be able to reduce the need to fertilize or use pesticides. You can also, when you're thinking about designing your landscape, just try to minimize your irrigation systems. Most of them are overhead spray irrigation systems, and that's wasting a lot of water. So utilizing like micro irrigation can save a huge amount of water and runoff, because a lot of these properties, as they're over irrigated, the water is kind of washing off the property and running down the storm drain. And you can help to capture some of that stormwater runoff off of your properties by creating buffers, rain gardens, and other permeable areas and surfaces. So this is just another part of that Sarasota National Estuary brochure. And this is just a great way to kind of think about your landscape and how you want to lay it out. Especially if you're just getting started, or even, if you've already been working on your landscape. If you take a Google Earth image and have a top-down view, you're going to want to create different areas to maybe play with your dog and your children. But then you're going to want to have areas where you're, screening out your neighbors, or you're capturing stormwater that's coming off of your gutter systems. Or you're, installing a more pervious driveway to help allow more water to filter through your landscape and stay on the property instead of just running off into the road. And then, creating buffer zones, especially along the water or along roads, is really important. So this buffer area should not really be mowed or irrigated after the plants are established, and you should not be fertilizing or doing anything in these buffer zones, so that you're reducing the amount of nutrient pollution and runoff that you're receiving from your property. And utilizing a swale can also help to hold water on your property as well. And as I said, when I have a few more slides to go through, obviously, but if you need to pull the plug, we can stop at any time.
You're good to keep going, Nichole.
Okay, all right, because I kept adding more wildflower plants into the talk, and then it just got longer. I was like, oh man, but I didn't want to leave them out. So this is just an example of a buffer with mangroves. So these are red mangroves, and some of them on the left-hand side have been trimmed, which you're allowed to do if you have a permit, which is great because at least they have mangroves along the shoreline. It's going to really help to slow the water down during storms. The roots are going to help to stabilize this area, filter the water, and create habitat for all kinds of organisms. And then this is called windowing. So you can window sea grapes and mangroves to allow you to still have a view, but this also allows a place for birds to still perch and nest potentially. And so this is a great compromise for people, because a lot of times when I'm talking to homeowners or different people, they're like, I don't want to put in mangroves. It's going to block my view. I'm not going to be able to see the water. But there are ways that you can do it where you can still really have a beautiful view and still have a beneficial shoreline for the water itself and for all the organisms that live there. And then this again is another type of buffer that I've created. And so if you can't have mangroves, not everyone is going to obviously be able to plant mangroves along their shoreline, but the salt meadow cordgrass, the spartina is excellent for keeping your view, very low maintenance, and it's excellent for holding on to the soil. And so this is, as this runoff runs off of this property, it's going to hit this buffer before it hits the water, and the roots of these plants are going to help to remove the nutrients and any chemicals and other things that are in the water and the sediments as well. This is some sunshine mimosa that's been planted along a seawall. And sunshine mimosa, it does really well. It's very salt tolerant. So, as long as you're not planting it right out on the dune, it's going to do pretty well. And I've had areas too that have been inundated even with water, not for long periods of time, and it still has seemed to do fairly well. So this is great because you can, like I said in my previous slide, you can walk on this. You can mow it if you want to, if you need to, but you don't have to. You're not trimming it, so you're not getting grass clippings blowing into the water, which is another huge problem for our area. For people, there's so many lawns that go right up to our canals and our waterways, and when you go to maintain them, it's almost impossible not to get the clippings in the water, or when you're fertilizing, your grass, not to get some fertilizer directly entering the water, or even just running off during rainstorms. And so then there's some mangrove spider lilies that are mixed in here as well. And then this is a fruit tree. So this is I got these images just from the UF IFAS office. So they offer a lot of really great examples for reducing your impact, utilizing your landscaping to reduce your impact on your local community. So they had installed this community, I think it was in Osprey, Florida. And so some of the areas just got, a lot of lawn and a lot of grass, especially out in this curb area in one neighborhood. And then in another neighborhood, they created kind of these smaller buffers along the road where the water could run into and kind of be trapped and be absorbed into these areas, and then also be filtered by the plants that are there as well. And to me, this bottom picture looks way more attractive than the top one does. You have more movement, more color, and it's easier to maintain. You're not having to mow this area with the grass clippings getting blown out into the street and then washed down the storm drains. So I thought this was a great example Florida-friendly, landscape practices. Rain gardens also can work this way as well. So some of them are designed where you're capturing the runoff off of your roof. And so these are designed, essentially, you're kind of digging down about a foot or two and removing soil and then coming back in and planting with different species of plants. The ones kind of, around the edge typically are going to be drier species, and then the ones in the center where the water is going to be deeper are going to be ones that are going to be able to tolerate more flood-like conditions. So in this one, it's capturing the stormwater that's coming off of the building and moving into this garden, and it's going to help to absorb that so it's not flowing down a storm drain. And then in the second picture, it's actually coming off of the street because it's sloped back this way, and it's going to flood this area, and it's going to help to trap nutrients and chemicals and sediments and water, of course, and the water is carrying all those things. So these rain gardens can capture a lot more water than just your typical landscape. And they can be beautiful and attractive. And you just want to make sure that if you're wanting to install one, you want to dig a test hole so that you want to make sure that the water is going to indeed drain out. You don't want to create an area where it's going to have just standing water. It's not going to function the way that you want it to. And then this is just to kind of give you an idea just about the root systems of a lot of these species that I've been talking about are really interconnected and deep growing. And this is sunshine mimosa here. This is seashore paspalum here. And so they're able to tap into, the water table and water further down so that during times of drought, they're able to survive. And this is going to help to stabilize the soils as well. Where you have St. Augustine, it has the roots of it are much more shallow. And so during times of drought and stress, this plant is going to, die back a lot more. And because of that, it's going to lose more soil during that time, or need a lot more irrigation in order to keep it happy. And in a lot of our coastal communities, the soil and the conditions aren't favorable for growing St. Augustine. It's just too hot and sandy. So this was a property and a project that I had worked on that had damage from hurricane, I believe it was Irma. It might have been Irma and Matthew, but they lost a lot of their soil all along their shoreline. They actually had to bring in truckloads of soil because they experienced so much erosion, and they had predominantly St. Augustine grass, and then they had some mangroves in a couple spots as well. So you can see the existing mangroves. And so we came in and planted Spartina patens and some muleys and some sandcord grass, a whole mix of species. And then this is what, and it didn't take much time for these grasses to really grow in and fill in. That's what's nice about them. They grow in, fairly quickly. So within a year, this is what the shoreline looked like. And so, the muleys, their root systems aren't connected quite as deeply and as much as the patens. So I kind of planted them behind there. That way, the Spartina patens would really help anchor the soil. But the muleys are just so pretty. You just you have to sprinkle them in as well. And so this was actually after Hurricane Nichole this year. We came out to the site, and this was actually covered in caulerpa, which is some vegetation that actually grows in the water on the bottom of the lagoon. It got all rolled up and kind of covered the Spartina, but it bounced right back and had no problems, and they didn't lose any soil or had any erosion issues. So it's done a really fantastic job there. And this is just their front garden bed. And we utilize a lot of yellow top. There's horse mint and tea bush. There's some cassia, there's wild lime and red tip cocoa plum, and some myrcene and marlberry. So this is just a beautiful wildlife garden that is one of my most favorite places to visit and to look after. And it's just creating a beautiful, fluid landscape that the homeowner just loves to come out and spend time in. And it's right along the water. So it's just a really important resource and something to consider if you live so close to the water. And then the last time that I was there, which was just a couple weeks ago, I came out and they were storing oyster reefs around this property as well. So the Brevard Zoo, which is our local zoo here in the Melbourne area, but they do a lot of conservation work. So they're working to do living shorelines. I've worked with them on a lot of different projects. And so they were installing oyster reefs here as well, which is kind of amazing. So they're really trying to do everything they can to help our estuary because it is really struggling. So we need not just our upland species to be helping to filter the water, but we need the species in the water to be working to improve the water quality here too, because we're still having fish kills. We're still experiencing a lot of problems, and we're still having, too many nutrients coming into the system. So these are just a couple other examples of, of ideas for shorelines. So some people want to have, utilize coquina for pathways or along the water, which is a nice natural local element that you can use because there's quarries across the state that you can kind of tap into. So it's a pretty inexpensive material to utilize. And a lot of our species do really well growing in it because it's almost similar to beach sand, but it's just a little bit different. But we have coastal lovegrass here. We have our yellow top. We have a spiderwort, which is also excellent. It wasn't part of my other part of my presentation, but it's one of my favorites. And then we have the inkberry, sea lavender, and there's some blanket flower in there as well. And then we have verbena and silkgrass and some Adam's needle. This was a project in Cocoa Beach where it was all zoysia grass, and she was just having a hard time. It kept dying. They kept having to spray it, and so we just removed all of the grass and created pathways with the stepping stones, reusing them. But we planted a lot of muley grasses and verbena. And this is the yellow top here. And then we had cassias and lantanas that all kind of spread and filled out in this area. And so now she just has tons of butterflies and bees and is able to, look out on the lagoon and know she's not being part of the problem. And she's part of the solution and providing habitat for the species that live in our community. And then this is going to be the last couple slides, so I'm wrapping it up. This is my front yard. And so this is when I first started and when we bought the house in 2009, and it was all dying grass. And I knew though, we needed to do something with the landscaping because we had no shade and I knew I couldn't leave it the way that it was. And so I planted mainly 1 gallon plants. We had some pieces of gumbo limbo trees because you can take a limb of a gumbo limbo and it will start to grow a new tree from that. So we got a few limbs that we planted in these center islands, and we planted beautyberry and horse mint, yellow top. This is silver saw palmetto. And so that was about 5 years later. And then this is 10 years later now. And so we removed all of the grass. And I was able to create my little mini maritime hammock here. And we just have tons of wildlife coming to utilize the yards, birds, butterflies, bees. And really over time, especially now that those grass areas are gone, because that's where a lot of weed seeds were coming from, we spend, maybe a half hour a month just walking through and kind of pulling weeds and doing a little bit of trimming so the path stays open. But it's definitely one of the best investments that I've made. And it's brought me, a lot of joy. And I've had, my yard on a few of the yard tours. So if you're looking at wanting to incorporate more natives into your landscaping and to reduce your impacts, I think one of the easiest ways to do it is to go on one of the local native landscaping tours, which a lot of them occur in October, to be able to see some of the landscapes that have been created already and find some inspiration from them. So your local Native Plant Society is going to be a wonderful resource. They're going to likely have meetings every month with speakers. And so you can kind of find resources and people that are more knowledgeable that way if you're feeling kind of lost. But their website online, the Native Plant Society, is wonderful for being able to search what species are going to work well for your region, your zone, for where you live. And they're the ones who really taught me everything that I know about native plants and these native ecosystems. Because I came from New Jersey, I wasn't familiar with many or any really of the plants that existed here. And so I was able to tap into my local chapter and go on hikes and field trips and visits with them. And then the more time I spent out in natural areas around me, the more I observed the species and where they were growing and what they were doing. And it just really kind of opened my eyes to like a whole new world. So I really encourage you, if you're interested, to start that way and then take it just, step by step. But having a plan and somewhat of a design laid out will help you tremendously over time. And it can help you limit a lot of mistakes that people tend to make with putting the right plants in the right place and all those other things that I had kind of discussed a little bit earlier. But I know I'm well over time, so I'm gonna stop here for our questions. So, and I'm gonna stop sharing too.
Thank you, Nichole. That was wonderful. We're getting a lot of comments from people that really enjoyed your presentation. And I just want to echo one of the comments that someone made is I learned a lot of plants that I didn't realize were coastally adapted. So
there are so many that when you look them up, they say not salt tolerant, not salt tolerant. And I think that for the most part, they're expecting it to, it to be planted out on the dune, and they're not going to be able to tolerate that much salt spray or that much wind, but very few people are, going to be utilizing it in that area. And so even my yard is just 1 block from the beach, and I can plant Boreopsis. I can plant almost, kind of anything that I want. That there's species that you wouldn't think would be salt tolerant, but are pretty salt tolerant.
Yeah, that's great. It opens a lot of opportunities for people who are looking to do this. We do have a couple of questions. Greg asked about the grasses that you mentioned and whether or not any of them need to be cut back. I know you said that they could be, but are there any that need to? Specifically, he's asking about reducing thatch and mitigating mealybug infestations. But
so mealybug can be a problem for muleys. I haven't really seen it on too many of the other species. It doesn't. I think that the toughness of like the sandcord grass and some of the other species doesn't tend to happen. But yeah, for the muleys, if you're having mealybugs, I would definitely go in and kind of just after the blooms have faded. Just kind of come in and crop those and cut those, and then you can kind of pull some of the thatch out from underneath of them, just to allow for more airflow, because that's what happens sometimes. It kind of gets like stagnant there, and then the pests kind of can take advantage of that and kind of start to multiply more and kind of take over. But if I've known that I've had it, as a problem in a yard, because my husband does maintenance for several yards, we'll just kind of come through too, and you can just kind of like almost like rake them a little bit with your hands, and you can pull a lot of those mealybugs off. And if you did that once a month, a couple times, like they would probably just kind of be in check. For the most part, that's enough. I mean, if you have a really bad infestation too, I mean, you could try, using a hose or using a little bit of soapy water to kind of knock them back as well.
Great. Another question, do the native dune plants take away space from habitat where sea oats, which may be more resilient to storms, would otherwise grow?
Well, they can. It depends on the species. And so for the most part, most of them are not going to be able to tolerate those conditions that far out onto the dune. But like, dune sun daisy is not, the root systems on that are not going to be as established as or as deep as a sea oats. So they're not going to, protect your property quite as well. And so, typically out there though, it's such a dynamic environment that things are going to kind of get knocked back at different times of the year or be stressed. And most of the species are going to, some of them are annual, so they're going to kind of die back on their own, and then the sea oats will kind of be able to fill in and take over. One of the natural processes that isn't out there anymore that needs to be is fire as well. So I didn't really talk about fire too much in the coastal ecosystem, but just like the rest of the state of Florida, fire is so important to that ecosystem. And so for us in our region, really, sometimes we're seeing the sea grapes kind of grow so much that they're kind of crowding out and making more monocultures, where if we were burning those areas, the sea grapes would be knocked back in those fires. And so you would have more diversity of species in that area, which would be important. But, you know, for the most part, I don't think the competition is that intense. There's only 1 or 2 species that I can think of where I would go in and intervene in a situation because they were causing an issue. And so one of those is coin vine. So it'll grow along the beach and the dune, and then I'll also kind of like along the shoreline of the lagoon. And it's like a sprawling vine, and it's very thick and woody. And so it's only anchored in kind of one point, but it will cover and shade out everything else. And so if a storm comes through, there's really nothing kind of holding the sand in place. And so we have done some projects where we've actually, it's one of the only natives I've ever really actively gone in and removed because it was disturbing the ecosystem and how it was meant to function.
Great. We are at 3:15, so while I do have a couple of questions outstanding, if possible, if you wouldn't mind, we can send those to you and get some feedback from you. And that way everyone can have their questions addressed without taking up too much more time. I just want to say thank you so much. This has been a really great presentation, and we're getting a lot of really nice comments in the chat as well, and people enjoying and learning so much from you. So thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Of course, I was happy to. I'm sorry, I know I went long, but I get too excited and then I can't tailor.
It's good information, and we want to make space for that. So we appreciate it.
Awesome.
Just as a reminder, we're recording this. We'll send you the resources and the recording link in the next couple of days. Again, thank you everyone for attending. And if you like what you see, please consider supporting our organization at flawildflowers.org. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Bye.